up, please welcome Skift Senior Research Analyst Seth Berko.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. I hope you are very much enjoying your day, and I hope you'll stick around with us for the rest of these afternoon sessions. So my name is Seth Berko. I'm a research analyst with Skift Research, and I'm here to talk to you today about some travel trends that are affecting the aviation industry. Now, I consider myself an optimist. I'm a glass half full person, but this is a really strange time to be in travel. And so normally I would come to you with 4 trends, and they would all be good. But today, I've kind of split the trends into 2 buckets, into strengths and into challenges. Actually, this is an airline conference. There are tailwinds and headwinds that we need to contend with on our flight path, right? I'm going to touch on all 4 of these: on the never-ending summer, on the blended traveler, on the state of the economy, and on capacity constraints. So let's jump right into it. The first trend that we've been speaking about is what I've been calling aviation's never-ending summer. Now, certainly if you're here with us in person in Dallas, summer's over. It's pretty chilly outside, we know that. But if you are running an airline, it definitely feels like summer is still very much with us, right? Airlines are still in a strong rebound mode. We've seen GDP grow above where it was in 2019 levels, but passenger traffic capacity, and even to an extent revenue, especially on a global basis, has not fully recovered or kept up with that growth in GDP. And so we're seeing a nice rebound happen in our industry. The other reality is that travelers just are demanding more travel, more frequently, and more time. So what we're looking at here, each of these 4 points is a different quarter, and we're looking at growth from quarter to quarter. Now, passengers used to fly with a very predictable seasonality before the pandemic, but you can see what happened in 2021 and in 2022 is that, summer never really ended. 2021 was an exception, obviously, but 2022, even this year, we remain strong. The 2Q seasonality bump was stronger than you would expect, and if you look at the drop-off to 3Q, there's not much of a drop-off at all. Passengers still continue to fly as if it is the summer. And look, you don't need to take my word for it. You can ask around. We had some of these people, even on stage today, Robert Isom here, talking about demand. What we are hearing from major executives at most airlines is that demand is very, very strong. They expect it to remain strong into the 4th quarter, into 2023, and potentially even into 2024. So let's ask the question, what is powering that demand? I would say the first place we should stop and look is, consumers. They have a lot of cash. The reality is that consumer balance sheets are quite strong. People were able to save a lot of money during the pandemic. There were government assistance programs, especially in the US and Europe. In the US, again, unemployment is low, wage growth is high. People are earning money and saving money, and they want to travel. Pelotons are out. Cancun is very much in. And so we're seeing a lot of travel demand. There's another kind of factor fueling this growth, and it's this idea of the blended trip or the blended traveler. And this section broadly, what I'm talking about is the enhanced flexibility that a more remote workplace has brought. I'm sure we all have different opinions on whether we like to work remotely or not, but I think I can say with a pretty objective fact that remote work has been great for the travel industry. This is from our Travel Tracker survey. It's a survey of 1,000 Americans. We do it every other month. It's a representative sample of travelers. And what they tell us is that when they're able to work remotely, they are able to travel more frequently. So this is, again, people who are working remotely. Something like just shy of 50% of remote workers tell us that either a long-term trip or a short-term trip, they've taken more of them because of their remote work status. There's also the real blended trip proper, maybe bleisure is what you would call it, when people are traveling for multiple purposes. On the left-hand side, you can see this is the amount of business trips that contain a weekend. It's risen by a significant share. That's a surefire sign that there is some form of bleisure, business and leisure happening there. I think we sometimes overlook the inverse, which is this concept that we're calling laptop luggers. People who take a leisure trip, but pack their laptop with them, answer some emails, do some calls, and as a result, they're able to extend their leisure trips and travel more frequently. This is a huge opportunity for airlines. It's also a challenge, because maybe customers don't fall into those same traditional buckets. It's not as easy to identify who's a business traveler and who's a leisure traveler, but the point is they're traveling more frequently. There's also this concept of maybe the democratization of business travel, that more people are able to travel for business, because in a remote world, business travel becomes corporate culture, becomes strategy. So this is TripAction's a major corporate travel agency. You can see what share of their bookings are coming from the sales department. It's still the majority of bookings, don't get me wrong, but you can see that share decline as people in finance, marketing, operations, HR, they need to travel for offsites, for strategy meetings, for culture, and for team building. And so business travel is becoming a more frequent type of trip. The result, I think many of us in this room understand, is the shift towards the more premium leisure traveler. If you're taking a blended trip, maybe it's not full enough of a business trip to justify a business class seat. Certainly, probably doesn't justify a first class seat, but you also don't really want to be sitting at the back of the plane. You want to have a more premium, more luxurious experience, and we're seeing a lot of upgrading to the premium leisure and premium economy seating, which is a very profitable product for airlines. So those were our two tailwinds. I do want to address kind of some turbulence that might be in the making, right? I think we need to be realistic about the risks of a recession, both in the US and globally. This is a survey from the Wall Street Journal of economists, and more than half of economists that they speak to now expect a recession in the United States within the next 12 months. And it's funky how they calculate recessions. For all we know, we might be in one now. We're not quite sure, but the risks are rising. I think if you were to, say, open the Wall Street Journal and read the front page about the business environment, the real headline would be about these tech layoffs, kind of as an indicator that the business environment is slowing down. I don't buy that so much. I think it's worthwhile remembering that tech headcount has grown significantly during the pandemic. I mean, Meta still employs more people today than they did in 2019, whereas the travel industry, writ large, is a smaller industry than it was pre-pandemic. And so I think there will be layoffs in travel, but I think it's not quite as much of a read-through as you might think to our sector. I do think, though, it is a bit of a warning, because tech had these great years in 2020 and 2021 when everyone was forced to be on a computer, and they kind of assumed that that would happen forever. We are going through this never-ending summer of huge demand right now, and hopefully it lasts through 2023 and 2024, but we maybe shouldn't plan on it lasting until, say, 2030. And I think we should be realistic about the fact that inflation is a very real risk and will chip away at consumer spending if we're not careful. And so again, this is from our Travel Tracker survey. 70% of respondents who experienced higher travel prices changed their plans in result to that. And especially for this audience, it's worth looking at some of the flight data. 27% use an alternative transportation instead of flying, and 24% picking a less expensive flight. And so although consumers are strong, if inflation remains too high for too long, and if air ticket prices in particular stay too high, it will start to have an impact on the industry. Now, one of the reasons why ticket prices are so high, it's a supply-demand equation. There is a lot of demand, and also there is a capacity constraint on supply, and we should discuss that openly as well. What is holding back a full recovery of capacity for the airline sector? My colleague, Jay Shabbat at Airline Weekly, he likes to talk about the 3 Ps, about property, planes, and people, all of which are necessary for capacity to restore to normal. We can start by talking about property, by which we mean, airports, air traffic control, that kind of essential infrastructure. Some of this is government related. This is an example from Schiphol Airport, a major connecting hub in Amsterdam. Their government is going to reduce the number of flight movements from 500,000 to 440,000, and that's going to cap them at 2014 levels of traffic, regardless of what happens as we come back from COVID. There are other examples of this across the world. Heathrow struggling to build a 3rd runway, and then there's also staffing issues, especially in the US air traffic control. It's been hard to get those people staffed up. So these are long-term constraints on property that is holding back capacity. There's also the planes piece of it, I think we're all very much aware of. We are very much on track to deliver a 1/3 less this year than we did in 2019 in terms of aircraft deliveries from Boeing and Airbus. And again, those are structural factors. It has to do with supply chains, it has to do with rising costs, and it also has to do with government, Boeing in particular, having some issues with aircraft certification. The final P I want to talk about is people. We've heard a lot about a staffing gap in airlines. There's a lot of headlines about how airlines don't have enough people. And so when I was putting this presentation together, I said, great, we'll make a slide to talk to that. We'll go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we'll look at employment, and it'll be lower, and that'll be my slide. Except that's not actually the story. Employment in the airline industry is 10% higher today, at least according to the US government, than it was before the pandemic. So what's going on here? Well, maybe it's because they're hiring people other than airlines. So we double check that, but actually, pilot employment is pretty high according to the Department of Transportation. We're at the same level of pilot employment today than we were in 2018. And so what I think is really happening when we talk about staffing shortages is we're talking about a training gap. This is what Bob Jordan, the CEO of Southwest Airlines, had to say. He says, the industry constraint is on training. We're bringing pilots up from the regionals onto mainline. Those are new aircraft types. We have people coming back from furlough who need to get recertified. We have co-pilots trying to upgrade to captains. All of that requires training. And so maybe the constraint is not so much how to hire people, but how to train people. And there's just only so many simulators, only so many instructors to go around. And so this is also a bit of a structural issue that will constrain capacity. Ultimately, these can all be worked through, but they're not easy or short-term fixes. I want to talk on this final slide about something a little bit different around capacity, but around a more global perspective on capacity. And so what we're looking at here is international inbound airline seats into 4 cities, which I've picked, that I hope to be kind of representative of a story. If we look at global capacity, we still are missing a lot of international global capacity. And you can see New York and London representative of North America and Europe, mostly fully recovered, maybe now around that 80% seat capacity level. The question is, of course, Asia and Asia's reopening. We know that China is still very much in a zero COVID world, and you can see that Shanghai data very much nil. But I do take some optimism from the fact that most of Asia outside of China is reopening, and that's what that Tokyo line is meant to be indicative of. We're starting to see the recovery of Thailand, Japan, countries like that, and hopefully that will be a tailwind towards the industry on a global basis. So that is my research presentation for this talk. I'll wrap it up here with just a summary of what we discussed. There is a huge amount of pent-up demand out there for flying and for travel, and we are really experiencing this concept of a never-ending summer, traditional seasonality not applying, and demand remaining very strong. This is being fueled by healthy consumers, strong balance sheets, and of course, the future of work, these blended trips. As people have more flexibility in their jobs, they are using that flexibility to travel more frequently and for more varied purposes. I'm very optimistic that the airline industry can continue to grow into 2023, even if the economy slows down a little bit. But it's something that we need to have on our radar, be realistic about, and plan for. We also need to work to return capacity to the levels it needs to be at to meet the current levels of demand. That's going to have a lot of structural headwinds against it, and it's going to take a lot of work from all of us in this room working together to solve those problems. There's no magic bullet, but hopefully we can find ways to bring that capacity back. That's all for me. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.